Hey everybody, welcome to the panel. I'm not going to shout. This panel is called Those Who Can Teach. The format, we're going to all introduce ourselves, and then I'm going to share a little bit about why I organized this, and then I have some questions for our panelists, and then I'm going to invite people in the audience to also share some of their questions. But first, I'll introduce I'm going to let Jesus, my good friend and colleague, just turn me down a little bit. My name's David Ladon. I'm a youth success manager at Youth on Record. I manage our podcasting and audio arts programs. I also designed our summer camp. And I'm also a professional musician, session bassist, and I'm a children's musician with the band Animal Farm. So that's a little bit about me.
How's everyone doing? Steven Smith-Contreras. I am an educator, percussionist, artist, community member, father. I work at Youth on Record. I've been there for about 8 months. I'm a director of academic success. So I manage our partnerships with schools, different community organizations. I also work with our teaching artists, curriculum development, and different learning and teaching modules and whatnot. I have experience both as a musician, working in the field, percussion, drums, also DJing, and have worked with a range of different organizations from large classical institutions like the Los Angeles Philharmonic to smaller community-based organizations that are trying to integrate music into different curriculums and community programs. So it's good to be here.
Hi, I'm Edwina Lucero. I am the music instructional curriculum specialist for Denver Public Schools. I have been in education for nearly 20 years. I've taught kindergarten through college, all kinds of different types of programs, and I've been a private instructor with a voice studio for that long. I've performed, I've done a lot of the things in music across the board. And I feel very passionately about sharing what we know with those around us and continuing to keep that culture alive. So,
hi, my name's Calanni. I am a music production and audio engineer teacher at Northeast Early College up near Peoria and I-70. It's a 4-year program where my students get college credit for learning about really cool stuff like producing music and audio engineering. Previous to this, I put on public shows in Oklahoma City, the big one being Kings of Leon. And I am really passionate about putting on free to the public shows, activating public spaces, creating creative placemaking. And I think that's where a lot of my work going forward will be in creating places where we can see each other and experience art together. I'm also an audio engineer and producer. I play guitar. I worked in the past for a pop country record label, so I have some industry experience on that side. And by night did punk rock, so I kind of have a wide, I would say that I'm kind of a generalist when it comes to all things music industry.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, everybody, and welcome to Impact Days. When I graduated college, I applied for a job to be an education director at a small nonprofit in Boston that had a recording studio. And in the final round of the interviews, I was asked, well, are you more of a performer or more of a teacher? And at that point, I was teaching private guitar and bass lessons. I'd come up through, I'd minored in music at a school with a conservatory, and I was playing shows pretty regularly. And I couldn't really answer the question. It was something that didn't really feel like, if I answered either way, it didn't feel authentic. And my relationship to being a musician and seeing myself as an artist goes back to when I was in college. I spent 5 months studying and living in Kenya, and mostly in Nairobi. And when I was there, people didn't call me musician, they called me artist, right? And I was hanging out with other artists. Wasani were the dancers and the drummers and the cooks and the musicians, and we were all artists. And everybody taught, or everybody's art was educative in some way. And so when I was put in the position to try to define my artistic practice as either one centered on performance or one centered on teaching, I didn't have a very good answer. I didn't get the job. But I did find myself spending much of the next 15 years teaching music both in school and community settings and now audio production. I didn't really have a vocabulary, though, to talk about the way that teaching was a part of my artistic practice until I was living in Chicago. I was working for a project called the Stockyard Institute, which is explicitly an arts and pedagogy project. It is built around designing social practice art projects that center on issues of education, community, equity, and it's been doing it for 30 years in Chicago, first in Back of the Yards neighborhood, and now really all over. And working with those artists, I started to understand that having myself be a musician and a teacher as like one identity was actually quite normal. If you look at classical music, if you look at jazz, if you look at creative writing, people with terminal degrees, people who are high achieving in these fields are all teachers. Esperanza Spalding was faculty at Harvard. Ann Padgett, the writer, is a professor somewhere. I mean, like, it's really within popular music that I found so many young folks and peers talk about teaching in opposition to playing. I even had coffee with somebody recently who says, I kind of feel like I haven't really focused, I haven't put out any music because I've been teaching. And to me, that feels like a false dichotomy, and I want to think about exploring in this conversation, how can our professional selves, how can the work that we do as educators tie into the work that we do as artists, and vice versa? How can our practices inform each other, and how can we create also maybe healthier professional options for the young people we work with, knowing that the music industry, you know, we exist in a time of concurrent crises. We live in a housing crisis. There's a climate crisis. There's a broader economic crisis when you think about wealth inequality. And so, like, thinking about these singular pop music or commercial music pathways, is that really fair to our young people if we're not also presenting education and teaching as a valid form of artistic practice? So that was a lot. Now I'm gonna lean in and now lean out. That's what I'm working on at work. It's one of my professional goals. So I would like to turn to you and ask each of you, how has teaching impacted your growth and development as an artist, and how does it influence your creative practice today? I'll start with Stephen because you're next to me, and then we'll change the order next time.
So, a couple thoughts. One is, to be a good teacher doesn't mean you're a good performer, and to be a good performer doesn't mean you're a good teacher, right? There's different elements to both, different qualities that I feel like each have their own lane. But there's like a perfect harmony when you can do both, right? And you can do both well. And I feel like a lot of good performers and teachers have found those different lanes, whether it's communication, whether it's staying current with the different styles of music, listening to what the community's listening to, what young people are listening to, finding those different traits and implementing them into both, right? So for me personally, that's been one of my paths has been, I'm more of a, you know, I started more of as a performer and was out there playing, and then started getting opportunities to teach and balance my income, right? So I had these opportunities to get out there, teach, and perform at the same time. And I feel like those, the skill sets that I learned from teaching, from working with young people that sometimes are going to tell you straight up, like, I'm not feeling this, or this is not working, right? And being able to pivot, being able to pull an audible, which we do that on stage too, right? Like, we're looking at different ways to share our music, share our talents on the stage, and sometimes we have to pull an audible, we have to pivot in terms of what the audience, the energy that's out there and whatnot. So I feel for me personally, that connection to both has been, I've learned a lot from my teaching and from performing, and it's helped me elevate in both realms.
I was like, that's not my voice. That was like an out-of-body experience. So yeah, when I went to CU Boulder circa 2004, no, 2000 was my fall freshman year. I declared voice as my major. I got into the School of Music and, got into like a really great voice studio and was the darling. And I took an ed class and I was like, well, shit, this is really cool. Like, I love sharing with people and I love getting kids excited about like music and making music and all the things. And it was really eye-opening because my professors all like dropped me like hotcakes as soon as I said, you know what, I think I want to switch to ed. I want to be a vocal ed major, not a vocal performing major. And they were like, okay, bye. And that was it. Like I didn't get mentorship anymore. I didn't get the things that I should have gotten because I was also a kick-ass musician, right? So I think it's unfortunate that kind of like distinction exists. And I'm hopeful because I think that times are a-changin', to quote the great Bob Dylan. I think that there is a movement now of cultural sustainability that hasn't been as intentionally looked at as it maybe was in the past if it was mentioned. And you do find that kids will call you out. Like if you are just stuck in your own specific world of music, then that's not necessarily going to serve the kids that are in front of you. And you can't get out of that world of music if you're not actively engaging in music making yourself, right, as a musician. So yeah, I think it's hugely important to be both. I actually want to start a revolution in like every ed program. You are both. Like, why aren't we both? Like, why isn't every performance major also required to know how to hang in a classroom? And why isn't every educator required to know how to hang on a stage? Like, it should be both because they just are so interwoven. I don't know if that answered your question, but thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, I think at least looking at like my career, what really matters most to me is that music is a really healing thing. Creating music together is a really creative, or really powerful, really healing thing. And in a lot of the positions that I found myself working really hard and not receiving that healing, the healing good vibes you get from working in music. What happens in the classroom is like truly amazing. The amount of healing that happens for my students in the way that I bring my creations, the way that they share their creations with me impacts my artistic output. I have a world of strange sounds and textures and chord progressions and notes and dissonance coming into my world that I never would have ever just come up with on my own. So they are like a wealth of inspiration for my own practice. I'll be doing a demonstration in class. I'll be like, ooh, actually that little ditty I just did showing how to program a trap beat or how to program drill hi-hats, maybe it applies to something else that I was doing. And someone mentioned earlier when we were talking, like the more those lines kind of blur, like the more impactful the classroom is and the more you get out of it in your creative process. Yeah, I think that healing kind of power in music is really what I've seen come to life whenever I kind of merge those two seemingly opposite, educator and artist. So yeah.
Well, so just to go off of the questions that I wrote, both of you touched upon this idea of blending this line between artist and performer, and also kind of the changes in conversation around cultural relevancy in music. So how has music education changed, both from your own experience, and we just discovered Edwina and I sang in the same choir, though we were off by a couple years. But how has music education changed, and how have maybe some of the changes that you're seeing today, both within audio production and modern music, or modern band rather, open up more pathways for young people to engage with you kind of in that collaborative spirit?
So my class is pretty different and unique. I am a CTE teacher, so I teach like an industry class. So I kind of get to do a little bit of whatever I want because I'm brought in as an industry professional to help my students gain employment in the industry. So like my job is very directly tied to like, here's what I do, here's the experience I have, and here's how I can bring that directly to you. So I don't teach music theory, really. We use Ableton and Ableton pushes, and it allows us to click a few buttons, and as long as we know the difference between a couple scales, and you can push buttons and make mistakes, like there's no barriers to music anymore. I mean, used to you could just sing if you want to start singing, banging on some pots and pans, but as far as grabbing a phone and an app and getting going, and then kind of guiding, like, hey, you're really good at this one side of things. Look at these careers, your sound design is amazing. Like, how did you make that sound? Who cares what the rest of it sounds like, right? But this one thing you did is really neat, like pushing them. You can make money in that. Like, keep doing that for the next 3 years, and let's see where you're at. So yeah, I think I'm in a unique position to have a lot of flexibility to kind of give each of my students a little bit individual curriculum for like whatever they are kind of naturally gifted in or gravitating to.
So I think music education has not changed, right? Like the way that we deliver music education has not changed, but the world that we are delivering it to has, and that's a disconnect. Like traditional music education in this country is deeply rooted in white supremacy. It is deeply rooted in oppressive practices. And so that comes along with gatekeeping and just all of the things, and Western music theory is one of those gates that it's really hard to get through. So I think that makes it even more important for like active musicians and active music makers in the community to be involved in music education in their community, because what we are teaching our students to learn how to do is function in this tiny little pocket of music world, and then when they leave us, they may or may not have the skills to transfer that out to play upstairs at the UMS and participate in a songwriting workshop, right? So to answer kind of that, like I think music education hasn't changed, and that is like the root of the problem.
Yeah, just echoing Edwina's point there, and also just, thinking about where we're at in terms of 2023, the access, the resources out there, YouTube University, so much, in our phones, we have Spotify and Tidal and Tidal and like libraries of music, right? There's so much wealth of information readily available. So when I think about music education and look back at my own pathway, which was not traditional at all, right? I didn't go to my fourth grade clarinet teacher like killed the band concept for me. He was not able to make the connection between clarinet and sax, Ron, and that just how much more, I don't know, the sax would have potentially drawn me a little bit more, but the squareness of that just did not work for me, right? And so my path has been much more on the cultural connection to Afro-Latin drumming and percussion and travel and learning more through oral tradition sense, right? But when I fast forward and I think about all the different styles of producers out there, all the different styles of music out there, the different genres, and that's really what drew me, what I was kind of caught on in thinking about this conversation was when we think about jazz or we think about classical music or we think about popular music, there's so many different like elements to those styles and how teaching is relevant, right? When you think about jazz and like a jazz trumpeter's studio, right? Their performance, all these different opportunities to perform, but then their actual studio and the amount of students that prolific, high performing trumpeters have, or saxophone players or pianists, right? I don't know where I'm going with this, but going back to that piece, right? There's so many different elements now today in terms of what's out there, what's available, and the path, right? Everyone can choose their own path into music making, and we just have to let go of what that traditional sense of music ed, that box that I think has slowed a lot of folks down in it. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of where I'm interested in this conversation going a little bit, is that in addition to like there are certain educational paths that we see as that are legitimized by institutions, there's also like certain professional paths that, like when I meet I know music teachers who won't say they're professional musicians, right? But they literally play music more than any of us every day. Versus, and then I have friends who are professional, I'm turned 39 last month, and my friends who are professional musicians who are my age almost exclusively play in wedding bands, right? But they're professional musicians, it's cool. They got their however many gigs a year that they count up, right? And then the other friends who are DIY musicians, I was very involved in the Chicago music scene, are lucky to make $50 and a couple drink tickets at night, right? And but they're professional musicians, right? And so I sometimes wonder if there are, well, I'm curious, and you spoke to some of this, the institutions we engage with are reflections of the society that we live in, and they also reproduce those relationships that we engage in, right? And so what are some of those inequities that you have seen as artists, and not necessarily inequities, but also issues that we navigate as from the maybe performance or recording side that you think teaching or education and maybe potentially the possibilities that education could become, how can we start to navigate those inequalities, those challenges, those obstacles for physical, emotional, and economic well-being that are so prevalent in the music industry? Was that question clear at all? How can education how can education, instead of just reflecting the problems, how can it also start to maybe be the solution?
I can jump in on that real quick. Just a couple thoughts around that. When I think about my colleagues that are full-time musicians out there gigging, 3, 4, 5 times a week, constantly on the hustle, they can't, you plan a vacation for 2 weeks, you're losing 2 weeks of pay, right? You have an accident or you lose your chops, right? And you're out for a couple days. That income source needs to stay consistent, right? So I think that when I start thinking about all the inequalities and inequities in music, I do think that integration of education into someone's portfolio and not staying in these lanes of like, I'm a performer, or I'm an educator, or I'm just a session performer, right? Like, how do we think 360? How do we think about all the different income sources and stability within this process and within this field? I think at the end of the day, that does and will support better health, holistic health, mental health, physical health, and economics, right, for musicians.
I was thinking on something David was talking about earlier with like the culture of the industry and professional musicians and some of the like maybe less healthy aspects of that culture and gigging until 2 a.m. and getting paid with like your tab and that calling it a night. That's good. And the idea of those who can't teach being the normal version of that phrase, right? And so I'm just wondering like what we can do to bridge the idea that like talented people can be educators can be talented in the music industry specifically without losing the edge. Like you can still be who you are. It's like there's this weird disconnect of identity, I think, with people. I mean, I'm experiencing it myself. I gigged a bunch before I had babies, and then I was like, I'm a mom. I can't play till 2 at Lincoln's Roadhouse. I'm becoming. Like, that wasn't what I actually said in my head, but that's what society said. So, yeah, I don't have like an answer. Those are ramblings, but I think that that's a really big issue. And so the schooling that we have for kids for music education is preparing them for a really specific type of success that they likely aren't going to actually get to. Because we've named that is success and there's nothing else that's on the table. So unless you're going to graduate from high school and go straight to some sort of conservatory program or really legit secondary and finish that degree, or don't finish it, go to Berkeley and do 2 years and then get connections and get famous, like that's the pathway to success. That is what being a musician is. And that's the disservice as well, I think, that music ed does right now, is not allowing there to be multiple pathways and multiple definitions of success. So I should feel successful as a music maker that I noodle on my piano every once in a while and like record on my Spotify. Like that should be sufficient for me to like be in the club, but it's not by most definitions. And so then you have to make the choice. And so if I want to pursue my musicianship, then I probably can't be the head of music for DPS, because where am I going to have time to do that? But if I am not the head of music for DPS, how am I going to pay my rent to sleep all day long after I gigged all night? So.
Well, and just to jump in, I think the average salary for an independent musician in Colorado is under $40,000, and the number is lower if you're not on a label. So and we live in a state where I think we're 7th in the country for the cost of childcare, 42nd in education funding. So.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, rock and roll.
Yeah, as a white guy, I'll talk about the inequities, and but I really do see. I mean, the music industry is still just white, male dominated. Once you get up there, I mean, everything as far as performance and artist side, it's about getting into the room, right, in front of the right people, and usually it costs a lot of money. Usually from generational wealth to get into the room, and then usually you're in a room with a bunch of rich white dudes that make the call. And so being upfront and being direct with my students about that, not just in the music industry, but also in social media, like, hey, there's a small group of people that control most of what's happening here, and so how can we game the system? And so I think my advice to students as they're pursuing either employment in music or continuing their education is, you really got to ask yourself the question, like, do you have to do music? Because, like, if the answer is no, like, yeah, it's very easy. You can pursue a job and continue doing music, right? If the answer is yes, I have to do music, which I've tried a lot of other things and I just can't go do other things, other jobs, for very long. I burn out so quickly because I'm always wanting that musical component. And so for me, that's kind of just been how can I stay music adjacent in my career and be open to taking a job that I maybe feel overqualified for, or it's the same kind of thing of starting out getting the coffee as an intern, but even if it's, you really want to be a studio engineer, that's like pretty tough gig to find in a commercial space. So how do you get there? Over 20 years, over 10, 15 years, how can you get to that point? And really sitting down with students and making a plan with them and sharing my experience that I've had, because I think it is a little, it's difficult to stay in music. And once you feel like I'm gonna go do something else, I gotta pay the bills, there's this relinquishing of right? But yeah, just encouraging also another big aspect of what I'm doing in my class that I think the students have taken over at this point is just forcing community and very directly. We will sit in a circle for 30 minutes every Monday and we will stare at each other in our faces and we will talk to each other and we'll listen to some music, and that's what we're doing. We're listening. So much music is just listened to as background noise now. And so even for students, just making them sit down, put everything aside and just focus on listening, that's a skill that is not that is something you have to teach and something you have to grow in to get all the way down there into the song. So I think I approach it a lot of like, how am I building this creative community to sustain creativity? And so I think that's a big point for me.
And actually, Ty, you have a number of like rituals that you incorporate into your community. Can you talk a bit more about some of the things that you're doing at Northeast Early College to foster a creative community?
Yeah, a lot of my students don't want to be in my class. They don't care that much about music. It was either my class, graphic design, engineering, or environmental sustainability or something like that, right? You're going to pick music class or audio production. Beat making class is what they all think of it as. So I get a lot of students coming in that have zero experience with music, maybe have never been creative, and it's very intimidating to walk into that space and see all the big studios and the keyboards and the Ableton pushes, and it's terrifying if you've never made music before to be like, whoa, I'm so new to this, I'm so fresh to this, and so I really try and, like I said, force this community. Every Monday, I bring some planned out questions to try and I keep saying force because there is a resistance to it. Now, every time I don't do a circle, they're all over me. What's going on? Why are we not doing this? And I'm like, well, last week no one said anything. And they're like, well, we still want to do it, right? And there's this desire for community and connection, but it's just not normal. Like even in a lot of homes with families, it's becoming more and more acceptable to just be so disconnected from what's in front of you. I see it in my own life too. So that's a big one. We also have listening parties, and we have a whole different set of norms whenever we're listening to music that was made within our community. And so we refocus on those every single time just to really encourage those students, like, if you're gonna be in this class, you have to share your art because this is an industry class. We're working on this stuff to get a job out of it. And so really a lot of the rituals that I build in are really just about that, trying to force a community, force them to look at each other. Yeah.
What about Fridays?
Yes, okay, yeah. Another, on Fridays we do a concert every Friday called Live at Lunch. It's incredibly hard to pull it off every single week. A lot of times, a couple students will get up there and jam. There's been a couple times where I've had to jump up there on drums and just like do something, right? But more often than not, if you give young people a stage and you give them the time of day to help them practice and grow a little bit of confidence in what they're doing, like, it's amazing to see people that would never speak in class get up on stage and sing in front of the school, and then they're a totally different person afterwards. Like, they're a rock star, right? And I don't know, it just happens building this creative community, right? Where hey, I know you got my back in my creative things, right? And we all want that even after school, like, that's the way you stay in this stuff, is like networking with your really authentic community, so.
I should say we actually have like hired multiple students through Ty's programs at Youth on Record. One of our fellows came up through Ty's program. One of the students who performs with our M&E, our talent booking company, is a graduate of Northeast Early College. So it's a really cool program.
I'll plug one. One of my students is playing tonight at 8. His name is Manny.
Oh yeah, Manny.
At
is
it bar 504? What is it? Something like that? 504? 405.
Okay,
yeah.
I don't go anywhere.
Yeah, so Manny's playing there at 8.
Yeah, Manny's
Manny
phenomenal.
rocks.
And they're on Spotify as well. It's Manny, period. That's the name on Spotify. And Edwina, you did some stuff at West that I thought was really interesting as well. And I want to highlight that, like, the things that they're describing are things that are challenging for us as industry professionals to put on with other industry professionals, let alone high school students. So yeah, can you tell us a bit about what you did with West?
Yeah, I was at West High School 2 years ago, and I was like a part-time teacher coach. So I taught 3 choir classes, and the West High School campus reunified the year that I was back. It was our first year back, so it had been broken into smaller schools by the district, and then the community was like, that sucked, nothing good happened, can we please come back together? And so they did. And so we had students sharing space that previously had been on opposite sides of the building, so there was like community kind of aspects to deal with there. And then just, you know, ninth graders in general being like, oh my God, what's happening in the world? And so most of my students had not had access to any kind of consistent music education prior to getting to West in that school year. So their middle schools, our middle schools in DPS were still trying to build back from some political things that happened years ago. And then elementary schools are also still hit and miss. So dealing with kids that were like, well, I had to have a class here and the only thing available third period was choir, so I guess I'm here. And I'm like, cool, I'm really glad. So I had a lot of resistance too. Like the community building is huge, and students who were like, I don't sing, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you can't, like, every human can sing, you actually can, like, let's just figure it out. And I was having like no success for the first semester, and this was my 18th year of teaching, and I'm like kind of good at teaching choir, like it's a thing that I pride myself on having had some success, and my students were like, no. So spring semester, I was like, we're doing something completely different. Like, I know it says choir on your schedule, but this is now a songwriting class. And so we wrote an album of social justice music and took the semester to do it. And the thing that activated them, which I knew was going to be the case because, spoiler alert, super white girl right here. But my husband is a badass brown man, so, and he makes hip hop beats and like is an MC and freestyles on his own. And so he came in with a friend of his, and like the moment they connected with a human who makes music for the joy of it, outside of like this academic setting of I have to be here to get my grade, like they were all suddenly into it. So I had to really flip the script into like, this is what you do to be just a music maker. Like, I'm not trying to make you pass this theory test. I'm not trying to make you do this thing. I just want to know what you think about these social justice issues. So there was that aspect of like sharing their identity, and then like push these buttons in Soundtrap, which is what we used. And we came up with a like 2-hour-long album where kids wrote these amazing, amazing tunes. You know, like 3 of the songs had the exact same beat track that they all loved, but every one of them was so unique, which also blew their minds. They're like, no, I'm using that track. I'm like, well, I know, but you already wrote the song, and they did too. And then they would listen to it and be like, but how come it's so different? I'm like, I know, how come? Because you're different. So it was just this really cool experience that without like an artist coming in with that approach of just like the joy of music making. And again, like I'm pretty good at connecting with my students because I have accessed portions of my own artistry at times and whatever, it's just like 20 years in the game. But with this group of kids, like I could not connect. And so as an artist coming up, it is so, again, as I said at the beginning, important to be connected to your community, because there are how many amazing musicians are walking around all of Denver, but especially West Denver, that we have no idea because they didn't feel welcome to be that in their classroom. So if you are a person who has the privilege of being that in the world, like you have to bring that back to the youth, because they have to see that like there is a pathway no matter what, that they can come to this place.
Thank you. I want to take the last little bit before I do closing statements to see if there's any questions in the audience for folks. Yeah.
Just as like educators in general, and then you had just mentioned trying to inspire your students to make art for the sake of making art. How do you guys find like a good balance between like encouraging like that free expression for the sake of expression, while also like evaluating students in like a quantifiable manner? Like, where is that medium?
Yeah, so there's standards for music. Colorado State Board of Education, blah, blah, blah. And there's national standards. The Colorado standards suck. They're really bad. I don't know what your opinion is, but I hate them. They are all about music theory and very little about like who they are as humans. Like music is so unique because it's in you, right? Like it is so intimately connected to our humanity in a way that most other outside of the arts contents are not. So that I think that is part of the challenge of like the world has changed but music education has not. So you find programs where like the students are able to analyze a Bach chorale and like tell you all the figured bass and yada yada yada, but if I'm like, cool, well can we just sit and like play over some chords and make something cool? They're like, I don't know. I don't know how to do that, right? So I think that the shift has to be like, we have to start with creative expression. If you can't express, then what's the point of all the rest of it? Like, it's a cool way to do math, music theory, right? Like writing it down and understanding, and it's really nice, but like, that's not it. And there's such an emphasis on that in academia that it's an important language and you need to know how to hang in both worlds, but it's not the only language. And a lot of music education right now is still focused on that. So that's something I'm trying to do in the district is like flip that around to like, can your students connect to themselves? Can your students connect to their community with music? And if they can do that, then we might have a chance at actually being successful with the theory. But otherwise, why are we doing that? So.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, this is a conversation that we've been having with our teaching faculty at Youth on Record for some time. With our partnerships at the different schools in DPS and Aurora Public Schools, they all vary. Some schools don't even want us to grade. Some schools want grades. Some classes require us to follow the standards. Others, we have the opportunity to kind of focus on meeting young people where they're at, right? And it's such a challenging question because when you're working with a group of young folks, maybe some have some musical background, some are coming with nothing. How are we, do we have the bandwidth to build out like individual assessment plans for each, which is an ideal scenario, right? But then really looking at, our teaching artists have used this concept of like, instead of a teacher, I'm more of a facilitator, right? I'm facilitating someone's creative expression. I'm facilitating the curation of this community of young folks. I'm cultivating this, right? But I'm also supporting them in navigating these different how they express themselves using music, poetry, lyricism, etc. So it's such a difficult crossroads. But when we're looking at like what's been established in music education and where we're at with music and all the varieties of it, it's a difficult one to kind of pinpoint.
And I have not been a classroom teacher for most of my career. I've taught private instrument lessons. I worked at music schools. I run our podcasting program. So for me, one of my joys of my work is that it's super iterative. And so I draw this distinction for those who go through the podcasting internship. I say, think about writing a paper for school. You write a paper for your class, your teacher grades it, gives you notes, hands it back to you, and you never look at it again. That's not what we do. Like everything is revised until you're done, until you're ready to abandon this piece of art, right? When we say art's never completed, it's abandoned, right? So the folks who come through the podcasting internship, we have a student, Akello, who won the worldaffairs.org youth podcasting competition for a piece he produced in our internship. He did 3 completely different drafts of the story and re-recorded it twice before it was done. And because for us and as artists, I want, and this is what I say to the interns also, we're going to be kind to each other, but the same way that I will ask my drummer to stop taking fills every 4 bars. It's not a personal thing, it's for the music, right? My drummer doesn't need to take, you hear that, drummers? You don't need to take fills every 4 bars. We are in community trying to improve, trying to be better in our art, and through play, through giving up on the idea that everything's going to be perfect early on or that we're being graded, but by being playful, by abandoning things that don't work, it allows us to actually create better art together. And so I have been really blessed. As a private instrument teacher, I always say, I'm not teaching you your instrument, I'm teaching you how to practice. right? So if I can set you on the stage for or set you on the path of self-education, where my students are coming in and saying, hey Dave, I know I was supposed to learn Beverly Hills by Weezer, but I realized that it sounds a lot like Smells Like Teen Spirit, and then I taught myself Smells Like Teen Spirit, that I'm being successful, right? It's not about them meeting certain benchmarks, but it's about being able to engage on a really a lifetime of self-education is how, and that's like, that comes from a place of privilege where I don't have to deal with standards or administrators. So I'm sure with CTE it's even different.
Yeah, it's an awkward balance, and like naming that, like, hey, I know your project's due on Friday. I know you're in love with this song. You want to redo this. You want to redo that. Project's due on Friday. I get it. We're still a school class. It doesn't have to be done, right? Often I'll give like small requirements where it's like, you must have EQ on 3 different tracks. You must have like 6 different instruments in your whatever, and the track needs to be this long, right? Real like, just like, have you met that? Not really grading on the quality of the content, more just like, did you follow the steps to learn these tasks? But it is it's a balance. One of my favorite things that I started at the end of the year that I'll probably bring back is just letting them grade themselves, because they're very honest, if not too hard on themselves. And just being like, what do you give yourself? How did you do on this project? Score yourself. And most of the time they're like, I don't know, like a D. And I'm like, this is a 100, stop. It's an A, like stop. You know what I mean? So having like a pre and post kind of like, how confident do you feel in this skill, whether that's EQing, compression, writing a chord progression, whatever it be. How confident are you before you start it? 0, 1, 2. How confident are you afterwards? What would you grade yourself now? And kind of going off of that. Because then it's more about, do they feel that sense of accomplishment and completion more so than me just kind of half-assing, grading quickly, because I have over 100 students. So yeah, it's awkward.
All right, let's take 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, I'll pass it to Ron.
First of all, I want to say thank you for having this discussion. As an administrator and a musician, I would probably have you do a professional development than all the professional development. And as teachers, we all know how boring they can get. But the idea is that you're connecting the dots. You're connecting what happens in the classroom. You're connecting students, your relationship. And you're also connecting other fields. We all know science is part of music. We all know reading is part of science. I can go on. And you're connecting those dots. So thank you for doing this. And Edwina, I'm a CU alum, except I was there in the 70s. I became an educator. But yes, same road. But I have a thought process in this movement, and I will call it a movement, is trying to connect those dots. And one of the things I would like to hear in your discussion, because having developed STEM programs and the need for that kind of thing in education, and we know where education is now, and we know the students, some of them are failing because they're not connected. How valuable do you see a STEAM program within classrooms, and how can you discuss with your administrators, your fellow teachers, to help support you? Because a lot of times you're in this by yourselves. You don't have the support of the science teacher or the English teacher or math.
Yeah, so DPS recently had a reorganization, as we do, and we now have a STEAM department, which is brand new, and so it's a little different than the actual acronym that most places use.
Yeah, the job posting included physical education.
Science, technology, ed tech, not engineering, arts, and movement.
Physical.
Is the M, because math actually has their own department, so we couldn't have them be part of the STEAM department. And so we've been doing a bunch of like learning. What is STEAM? Like what's the definition of it? How is it different from STEM? How is it different from arts integration and all of these ideas? And what I've really come to is like music, visual art, movement, creative writing. These are the ways that we connect all of the things of the other contents. So it seems weird that you would have like music in a math classroom, except why wouldn't you have music in a math classroom if that's going to enable a student to have a deeper connection to that content? Now, I don't want to say I don't think we should have music classes at all, but I think that if we allowed students to access that creativity anywhere they were and not just in defined spaces, then we maybe wouldn't need music classes, right? Like, we still need them, but maybe that wouldn't be such like a dire just urgency that we have right now. Which is also part of those systems of oppression that music ed is deeply rooted in, right? Like, we literally like took music making and exultation and like wailing and movement, and we said, you can't do that anymore. You need to be quiet, except if you want to pay a lot of money to come here for a person without any melanin in their skin to tell you how to dance the way that your ancestors danced. Then it's okay. Then it's legitimate. So I don't know. Music ed needs to be revolutionized, as does education in general, because I think if we allowed creativity wherever and whenever, then a lot of these things wouldn't be issues anymore. We would be able to have those dots connected and just make so much sense when you're in the trenches with it, and it's so frustrating that people who make decisions for us don't get it.
Just one thought around that creative economy. Like, we have to focus on that. In the state of Colorado, the creative economy is the 4th largest industry. If we are taking out arts integration in education, I mean, we're failing our young folks, right? So many of these schools, so many young people have been failing in this system for decades, right? I think back of my high school days, a little ways back, I went to East here in Denver, and had my art teacher been able to connect some of the dots around like art and the opportunity within like visual arts, that could have been huge for me. And no one really pushed me in that space, right? It really was on me to gravitate towards music and kind of take a leap in that space. But to that point around STEAM, I mean, the arts integration into education and schools, and really reflecting on the creative economy. Thinking about Colorado, we're a state kind of, we're not in the like Los Angeles or New York or Atlanta. We're not in these like big metro areas that have a big creative economy, but we're doing a lot here and finding ways also to get young folks that are underrepresented in these spaces, in these creative spaces, and whether it's, when I think of Colorado, I think about the creative economy connected to outdoors, to the outdoors, right? Skiing videos, all of that, right? All the branding. There's a lot of resources there and a lot of opportunity there. How do we connect some of those dots within education, and specifically urban education?
The only thing that I would add, not so much focused on STEAM, but a lot of the parents that, I teach high school, so a lot of the parents that come through our school, it's a pathway school. The intention is that you're being trained for an industry. They want more options, more industry options, so that students are gaining real skills to take, whether that's continued education or to go directly into the industry. And so I would like to see more of those kind of pathways, CTE classes that are really preparing students to go into the industry. Yeah.
I want to just add 2 things. One thing that Edwina talked about was use the word arts integration, and I think that in a lot of schools we use the word arts integration to describe things that are not arts integration. It's arts adjacent, or we're just incorporating music. We're going to use music to teach kids about the capitals, and so we watch the Animaniacs video, Elder Millennial, right? But no, arts integration, there's the Kennedy Center, so I want to point you all that the Kennedy Center has a really awesome working document that outlines arts integration and what it means, and gives a nice rubric, and I really encourage people to read that. I'm not going to summarize it well, but I do think that if we really take a holistic approach to arts integration, and I say that the podcasting program is a STEAM program because I'm teaching people about acoustics and engineering, and also using podcasting to. We had a student who was really interested in understanding how traffic engineering works, and they interviewed a traffic engineer. I do think that if we really take use if we start to utilize the possibilities and the real radical possibilities of arts integration, I think STEAM is like a natural fit. The other thing I wanted to say is that like we live in a climate crisis, not just this month, but all the time. And I do think artists are going to be the ones to help us. Well, I think artists have two roles. One is using our art to talk about these issues and to explore these issues. And I have a good friend who just wrapped up a Fulbright who does a lot of work around oceans, and she uses like ancient or like old photography techniques to document like trash in the oceans. But also that we as an industry have a lot of work to do. Some of the largest carbon emitters in the country as individuals are famous musicians, right? Drake and Taylor Swift, their carbon output is like our lifetime combined, right? And so how do we also as an industry, and I think this is to some extent about how we think about the physical and mental wellness and addressing the fact that all of our contractors that we work with, the people paying us, make money off of selling alcohol. That's what the music industry is. That's how venues make money, is selling booze. And so I think it's owning that element of it, but also that like we as an industry have a lot of work to do in terms of addressing the climate crisis, and we've started that with the tin cups that they developed at CSU, I think. If you've been to a concert lately, they have aluminum cups. That came out of the universities, but also seeing that when we think about integrating STEAM learning, that the climate crisis, I think, is first and foremost something that needs to be addressed.
Just a couple thought piggybacking on what Ty mentioned too. Thinking about the pipeline, right, and thinking about pathway schools and these connections to the industry, we also need to put more pressure on our industry, like these folks running the industry, these big organizations, whether it's big studios or even startups here in Rhino. They're all over the place, right? How are we putting pressure on them to connect the dots within young people that are choosing these to pursue careers in these art forms and whatnot? And thinking a little bit about what you're mentioning, David, you know, when we think about the inequities within the music industry, right, and thinking about the strike right now that's happening, it's super related to the music industry, right? When we look at Spotify and how much money they made last year and how much they're paying streams and all the different layers, right? And these, you know, folks running the labels and really profiting over the artist. There's just a lot of work to be done across the board. So.
As we wrap up, I do want to, if you're watching at home or if you're here present, you've probably heard the term CTE mentioned a bunch. It does refer to career and technical education, and you as an industry professional actually can look and apply to be CTE certified. Is anyone here CTE certified? We've got Avery CTE certified, CTE certified, CTE certified. So if you have experience working as a sound engineer, as a video production, you can get certified as well and get those union teaching jobs with the district, which is awesome. So I do want to encourage folks to do that. And also, please, you know, Youth on Record, we are an organization that really tries to offer opportunities for young artists. So please apply to be on our sub pool. Get in touch with me directly because I'm constantly hiring young people in different teaching functions. And also, we want to get you involved here at UMS next year. So thank you so much for taking the time. I want to give a big thanks to our guests. Can we find, now, as artists, can we find your music anywhere online?
Yeah, most of the stuff I have up right now is my professional work, so you can find it. I just have it on SoundCloud. Ty Bones, TYBONEZ.
Ty Bones.
I have a little SoundCloud that hasn't been updated in a while, but I think it's Edwina Music.
I've got a gazillion tracks that need to be exported and put up, but you can find some of my music on all the platforms under Yuka Soul, YUCASOUL. But just there's not enough hours in the day. Right now I've been spending a lot more time performing. Shameless plug, we're playing tonight, midnight at Stoney's. We've got a DJ live percussion set, so it's going to be live.
And thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of UMS and Impact Days, and have a great weekend. Stay hydrated.